Hello everyone, this is Outstar and welcome to yet another Bloodlines 2 related video. Today we're going to focus on another clan, this time Ventrue, announced this week to be one of the playable clans in the game. Ventrue is the clan of kings, the clan of nobility, the clan that again suffers a lot from its stereotype. Although I have to say that from all the clans I know, I think Ventrues are the one that usually live up to their stereotype the most. There are some exceptions for this rule, and there are some interesting ways to play and roleplay as your Ventrue. I'm going to mention them later. But as the stereotype is mostly very much true, we should start with what Ventrue are in general. And Ventrue are basically the establishment. They are the personification or vampirization, if you wish, of dignity, grace, honor. Sometimes. More often they are the vampirization of power, control, money, politics, and everything we hate in them. They consider themselves as the one that should be on the top and the ones that know what's best for others. But the thing is, it's usually true. Without Ventrue, the Camarilla, the Masquerade, and all of this vampiric establishment that let them survive for so many years would crumble. If you guys played Bloodlines 1, you probably remember what Bertrand Tongue said about Ventrue, and I think there's a lot of truth to that.
They get a bad rap if you ask me. Everyone likes to take shots at the man in charge. But when it comes to getting the job done, the Ventrue know how to step up. They can take the heat.
When it comes to people in charge, nobody really likes them, usually. Being in charge often means that you have to sacrifice the good of one group for the general sense of good. Being in charge means that you will make yourself a lot of enemies and that you will be always under the spotlight, judged by everyone else whether what you're doing is right or wrong. But if you were in charge, would you be immaculate? Is there a possibility to have the leader who doesn't make these mistakes? Is there a possibility to have a leader who is utopically good? Ventrue don't really think about that. They don't really take this into consideration when they rule. They are obsessed with their history, and not in a way that Tremors are obsessed with education. They wouldn't really sit in the books and try to find the truth about what happened to their antediluvians in the past. They would rather be obsessed about the mythical part of the history, the one that is being passed from sire to child for generations, and the one that tells the noble deeds of their clan and how amazing their elders were. It's more about this mythical blue blood, you see. It's about how kings have the blood of the gods in their veins that actually makes them more proper to rule the peasants than anyone else. The very first member of the third generation of vampires, the antediluvians, the ones that started the clans, was apparently Ventrue. And we don't really know much about Ventrue himself. We do call him usually Ventrue with the U without the E at the end. He has many names, he's called differently depending on which Ventrue will tell you the story, but he did start a lineage of natural born leaders, and that was always the truth for Ventrue. Back in the ancient days, they didn't actually hide their supernatural nature. You get what I mean. When it came to interactions with humans, they actually bathed in it, they publicly exposed it. They want to be treated as god and goddesses, and this happens to a lot of the Ventrue elders. One of them you can know from history books, or rather mythology books. Artemis, the Greek goddess who was apparently a Ventrue that led Sparta. Sparta is a little bit like something that Carthage was for Bruja. Sparta was supposed to be this ideal world for the Ventrue where they use mortals in their perfect full potential. The mortals of Sparta were loyal, brave, and devoted to self-perfection, and they were devoted to their Ventrue leaders. And it did work for some time until the wars with Bruja happened. If you watch my previous video about Clan Bruja, you will actually notice a lot of antagonistic ideas in this particular video. Ventrue and Bruja are on two different sides of the spectrum, I would say. And they were always hating each other, and this still goes on up until this day. As much as most of the Bruja left to join the Anarchs, Ventrue were always the main pillar of the Camarilla, and they are still up until today. Another big enemy of Ventrue was Clan La Sombra, about which I would love to make a video one day too. La Sombra being mainly part of the Sabbat, nowadays they're actually a part of the Camarilla, and I do predict that they might be a playable clan in Bloodlines too, but that's just my opinion. And the whole conflict with La Sombra started mostly in the medieval times, when Ventrue were mostly the authors and the propagators of the feudal system. They used it to its max. It was a perfect system for Ventrue, who were often posing as kings or nobility that had power over the peasants. La Sombra, though, they held the power over the Catholic Church. And as you probably know, the influence of the church in the medieval times was extremely vast. That started the conflict that does still exist until today. When La Sombra joined the Camarilla, Ventrue are the ones that really opposed that, and are still the ones that treat them like shit for that. But back to Ventrue, they did remain in power throughout the medieval times and really rise to prominence during the Victorian Age, especially thanks to the British Empire. The story of British colonies is the story of Ventrue venturing to different parts of the world and establishing their domains in India and various other places. That's how Ventrue spread their power all around the world, thanks to the British ships mostly. Ventrue's golden age were always the times when the government had the most power, as Ventrue were often standing behind the government, doing a lot of the politicking both for the kindred and mortal societies. One of these times in the more modern ages is Cold War, where Ventrues were actually on both sides of the Iron Curtain, steering the propaganda from behind and making sure that everything that happens is more or less controlled by them. Nowadays though, I think it would be foolish to say that Ventrue didn't change at all throughout the ages, especially when you compare it to the most ancient times when they were the rulers of the mortal society and they still try to be ones throughout the medieval times, the Victorian Age. Nowadays, it's a little bit different. The more we get to modern times, to 2019, the more isolated Ventrue become. Mostly because of the rising power of humans, not the little power, as they do not have any strength still to overcome vampiric disciplines. What humans have though is technology, they have information, they have all of these things that allow them to infiltrate the vampiric society throughout the ages and realize that, hey, vampires do exist. The President of the United States, FBI, CIA, the secret organizations all around the world, mortals that were back in the days known for being under the control and influence of Ventrue are now aware of their existence. And with the Second Inquisition on the rise, and with the rising threat of humans actually trying to fight vampires openly, Ventrue lurk a little bit more in the shadows. In the shadows of their private booths and private jets and VIP rooms, of course. Not in the little shadows, not in the sewers, ew. They do lurk, and they are afraid. They are afraid of modern technology. A lot of the Ventrue openly reject it. Some of them still embrace it, standing behind the biggest technological industries and companies in the world, which really nowadays have more power than some of the governments. A lot of Ventrue will use their wallets and their actual influence first before using their disciplines. Because years of experience in leading people, and also the experience of their sires and grandsires and the whole lineage, made them made for it, basically. Ventrue are second only to Tremere in terms of organization. If you want to hear more about Tremere, you can check out my previous video, but basically Tremere had this whole pyramid in which back in the days they were blood bonding one member to each other to make sure that the hierarchy is kept. Ventrue's hierarchy is also very important, and Ventrues themselves do believe that it's worse than Tremere's. Mostly because in the Tremere society you can rise up in it based on your merit alone. If you are a very promising neonate of Clan Tremere, you can get some knowledge, you can find some artifacts, you might get lucky, you might be extremely ambitious in the attempts to educate yourself and the others. And with that, your power will raise, and your power within the clan will raise as well. In Clan Ventrue, it's all about the age. Your sire is the one that will have the power over you, and no matter whether you are a better leader than him or her, you will always be on the bottom of the ladder in comparison to your dear daddy. Don't call your sire daddy, but you know what I mean. And that's because Ventrue do care a lot about their lineage. It's all about this tree of power coming from the mythical antediluvians, which no one really knows the name of. And yeah, it's kinda hard to raise in prominence if your sire is still alive. You know what to do. Actually, about the lineage, one little trivia. V5 core book has one of the most annoying lore sheets ever dedicated to Tremors who are focused on their lineage. Very quickly explaining what the lore sheets are, instead of buying your regular advantages and flaws when you create your character or when you invest experience into your character, you can also buy lore sheet points. And the lore sheets are connected with either some people or organizations or maybe events and expand the backstory of your character, also giving you some additional powers. For example, there is a lore sheet of Jeanette and Therese, the ones from Asylum Club in Bloodlines 1, and you can invest into it to have them as one of your friends, or to have them as your employer, basically. And there is one Ventrue lore sheet called the Pure Ventrue Lineage, which is dedicated for Ventrue players who want to really roleplay this kind of a Ventrue who is coming from a very noble lineage of Ventrues. And I swear it's the recipe to make the most annoying character on the planet. Because if you invest your points in that particular lore sheet, you will be able to, for example, talk about your lineage for up to 30 minutes straight. And instead of getting a bat to your head, people talking to you will think that you're actually cool. I know, right? You will get bonuses to social skills if you recite your whole lineage. And yes, you can take up to 30 minutes while doing so. The top power of the lore sheet is knowing the name or one of the names of the Ventrue Antediluvian. And you can, once per story, drop this name in public. And all Ventrue hearing it will have to fall on their knees and listen to you. Now about the Anarch Ventrue, because some people are determined to think that Anarch Ventrue do not exist. There's nice dialogue in the book which I will quote. Ventrue do not exist within the Anarchs because our blood rebels against such freedom. Our lineage is one of nobility, law, and loyalty. The Anarchs respect none of these things. I do respect loyalty, it's just that I've realized who I really should be loyal to. Ventrues being natural-born leaders and being actually talented in that field, they do rise quickly in prominence within the Anarch ranks, often becoming barons, often having an actual influence in the Anarch field. The only thing that they must do to gain that power is to show public contempt their own clan. Because as Bruja are still the major part of the Anarchs, Ventrues are not usually that tolerated. When it comes to Ventrue archetypes, the people that Ventrue usually embrace, we have another case in the book where the archetypes are very stereotypical after Thor. Although I do think that they might be interpreted in original ways, that's the list. We have the cold-blooded corporate director, I think that's pretty obvious. We have member of the order, and these are actually Ventrues which rise in prominence within orders such as Freemasons or Illuminati or some secret university organizations, the gentleman clubs, you know the drill. Then we have the archetype of a conservative politician, I think that's also pretty logical for Ventrue. The Godfather, like from the famous movie in the book, someone who is the leader of the criminal organization, someone who is the leader of mafia, someone who actually rules within the crime world and not the world of nobles or corporations. And then there's an archetype of a high priest, although it doesn't mean exactly someone coming from the church per se. It means someone who treats one of the Ventrue elders as the deity and preaches that noble elder and shares the history of that particular person throughout his or her followers. The High Priest archetype is very useful for those players who actually go with the lineage route, because by preaching openly to one of your grandsires, let's say, you can actually make your status stronger within the Ventrue community. So as you can see, all of these archetypes are very conservative when it comes to how the power can be interpreted. It's all the people who are rich, who are high in the society, who are somehow important. I think this importance can be interpreted in different ways, and I'm very happy to roleplay with some people who actually play a little bit different Ventrues. For example, one Ventrue that I really like in our campaign that we are doing on Discord is a guy who plays a stunt actor. He's young, he's hip, he wears grills, he's an actor, and he influences people who are actually his fans. He is a leader of his fan club. He is a leader of those groupies that always walk around him. When you see a character like that, you may think that this should be a Toreator, but I think playing such a character as a Ventrue is also super fun. If I can throw some more fun archetypes to the pile, I would say typical Karen. You know, these women who are often very loud and very influential in some local small societies, like neighborhood club or parental club at school or whatever. Then you can also have the teachers, the principals, people who are always the leaders in the educational fields, having a lot of students underneath them and ruling over them somehow. And obviously military leaders, any generals, any people who like to give commands. So about their disciplines, I like how Ventrue's disciplines are extremely connected to who they really are. And it's actually very easy to explain each one of them and their ties to Ventrue's characteristics. So first of all, you have Dominate, which obviously makes people act according to your commands. Ventrues do also have Presence, just like Toreadors, but the difference between Dominate and Presence is that Presence is more about influencing people, and Dominate is about just strictly messing up their brains to believe that something is true and to obey. You cannot really command people through Presence. You can try, and you will be more charismatic, and you will be more prone to be listened to, and people will be very often in love with you and they will just do anything to make you happy. But when you use Dominate, it doesn't really matter how enticing you are, it doesn't matter who you are and what is your position in the society as of current. Person in front of you will obey. And that's it. That's also why I think Dominate is a little bit more risky to use in general. When you roleplay Dominate versus Presence, Presence actually, again, influences people and they still do act out of their own will, which of course is malleable and it's kind of a non-consensual way if you think about where it comes from, the supernatural magic of your beauty or whatever. Dominate, straight messing with people's brains, making them obey no matter what, may leave them later on thinking, oh, what have I done and why did I do this? That's why Forget is a very important part of Dominate. It's a skill which allows you to erase the short-term memory of your victim. Very useful for feeding, for using Dominate, and for all of the different reasons. And you can hear me saying a lot about messing with people's brain. There's actually a big reason for that. Dementation, which was originally the separate discipline for Malkavians, that they were using to mess with people's brains quite literally. You remember from Bloodlines 1, making people believe that they are eating a plate full of maggots, etc. That was a dementation, right? So in V5, dementation is actually a part of Dominate. Fun thing is also, you can play Malkavians without picking the dementation skill per se and focusing on the other side of the Dominate. But about that, more in the Malkavian video, which I have to make one day. The last discipline of Ventrue after Dominate and Presence. If you want to know more about Presence, you can check out my Toreator video because I explain it there fully and in detail. The last one is Fortitude, and Fortitude is the one that makes vampires more sturdy. The reason why Ventrue have Fortitude is because once a king is on the throne, a lot of people want to dethrone that king. A lot of people want that crown, want that power. And Fortitude is supposed to make Ventrue stay on the throne like a rock they are, and no one will be able to move them from it. I think it's a really cool interpretation and the reason why they have it. They are supposed to be untouchable, and Fortitude allows them to do that. Fortitude is a second discipline after Dominate available for players of Bloodlines 2. And as much as Dominate seems to be the more fun one because it allows you to control enemies and, for example, tell one enemy to attack the other, I kind of think that Fortitude is going to be the one to pick if you really want to be OP in your gameplay. Because the developers mentioned that Fortitude is going to work in a way that you will be able to withstand the damages from every enemy, to some point of course. And I think that a lot of people will go in the Dominate route because it's going to be fun, but Fortitude is going to be the one that will give you a true power over your enemies. Now let's talk about the Bane. The Bane of Ventrue was always the same, and that's kind of repeats in V5, although the mechanics are a little bit different. Bloodlines 2 also has the same curse apparently, but we do not know a lot of details about how it will work in practice yet. The curse of Ventrue is their refined palate, the refined taste for blood that they have. They're not going to drink just anything, because if they do, they will vomit. Same as they did in Bloodlines 1. If you actually drank from a prostitute on the streets, from a bum or from a rat, you immediately vomited everything that you took, and it was in the end taking more blood from you than you took from the victim. They cannot also drink the cold blood, the bagged bloods, any sort of animal blood. They cannot pick the predator types in the V5 core book, such as farmer and bagger, because of that. There is a merit in the book called the Iron Gullet, which allows you to also drink clotted or rancid blood. You know, you'll basically store a blood in a container somewhere and forget to refrigerate it. If Ventrue drinks that, don't drink that. So back in the days, Ventrue's taste was mostly about the ones from the higher parts of the society. So the mortals which were well-fed, healthy, and whose blood tasted a little bit better than the one of a junkie on the streets. In V5, the situation is a bit more interesting, because now you pick a Ventrue preference. You have a preference of selected kind of immortal that you drink your blood from. Or you can be a vampire too. If you're a blood lich, you may also want to drink from vampires only. Why not? The preferences range greatly, from a specific age, specific appearance, specific background. Let me give you a list of examples of Ventrue preferences that you can pick. Genuine brunettes, individuals of Swiss descent, homosexuals, soldiers, mortals who suffer from PTSD, methamphetamine users or any particular drug user, recent victims of physical assault, mortals in the shower, literally anything. You think, okay, I can only drink from Asian ladies. Why not? You can pick that. Then you can come up with, I can only drink from people who are close to dying. And then you are actually a Ventrue who visits hospitals and drinks only from those that are supposed to die soon. This may be also interpreted in a very positive way to make a good character, so you can only feed from those who are guilty of something. You can only feed of those who deserve the punishment, whatever. The preference usually bases on your sire's preference or on your mortal life. So if you were, for example, an artist in your mortal life, you may have a preference where you only drink from other artists. If you are dating only blonde girls with blue eyes in your real life, you may want to drink only from them when you are a vampire. Ventrues can roll to tell if it's a blood that they need, if they are not really sure. So for example, if you have the individual of a Swiss descent, you're not really sure if someone is Swiss or not in the club, you can try to determine that by looking at them very carefully and sniffing them probably. In terms of how to roleplay it though, it's very important not to surround yourself with people of that particular preference that you have. Usually smart Ventrues surround themselves, of course, with some people of that preference, but also some other ones to make other bamboozled what your real preference is. Because once another vampire knows your preference, they do have some power over you. It's a very important information because it might be your weakness. Other vampires figuring out the preference of Ventrue very often take that particular mortal of this particular preference and dangle them in front of Ventrue's faces, saying, you can't have this. And that very often tilts Ventrues off a lot. So apparently in the game it's going to work in a way that you will have to determine the correct order of actions during the fight to make sure that the person you can actually feed from is last on the battlefield, so you can feed on them after you use your disciplines, etc. How the preference will be determined, we have no idea, but I am waiting for more information. So guys, next week we have the last clan announcement for the vanilla game. My personal belief is that it might be La Sombra, but I also think that Nosferatu or Malkavians are possible. Maybe there's a tiny little chance for Gangrel, Ministry or Banu Hakim, but I would be very surprised if it's one of these. Let me know what you think will be the last clan, and I wish you a good night. Don't get lost in it. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and goodbye. Oh, I'm so happy that the video is done and no one realized that I actually have a sweatpants on, because none of my suit pants fit me anymore. Oh.